For RCR Wireless News, I'm Sean Kinney, and I'm here today with Jim Nolan, who's the EVP of IoT Solutions for InterDigital. So, Jim, thank you so much for taking a moment to speak with us. And as we get started, can you give us a overview of the type of work that InterDigital does and what your role with the company is?
Yeah, so I'm responsible, as you said, the role is EVP for IoT solutions. But previously, I've worked or run the research and development organization within the company, and now running a group that's focused just on IoT solutions. So I have worked with the team, the R&D team that's developed solutions for 5G and precursor solutions for 5G. So I'm very familiar with the company's R&D roadmap, the team, and the execution towards that.
Okay, so 5G and IoT, which is exactly what we're here to talk about today. And as we get started, I was hoping you could take us through some of the standardization work around 5G and IoT and tell us a little bit about InterDigital's involvement in that standard setting process.
Great. Yeah. From a standardization process, just clarify what 5G standards are. There's been good amount of work being done worldwide over the last couple of years in preparing for what 5G will be. So from a more narrow definition of 5G, as put forth by 3GPP and others, it's the next generation wireless standard for wireless connectivity, and what it promises is, as each of the last improvement each G has done, is an order of magnitude improvement in terms of throughput, latency, and I would say price performance. Maybe not an order of magnitude, but continual drop in price while that performance is improving. So 3G technically. The 3GPP definition of 5G would be release 15 and release 16, just as LTE was release 8 and beyond. But there is actually multiple elements to 5G. 5G is in essence a next generation of the mobile ecosystem and platforms. So it is narrowly defined in terms of what happens with the air interface or the wireless connectivity, but there's really more to it than that. There's also other things that are happening, that are evolving, that will drive and define 5G. Some examples. Software-defined networks, network function virtualization. These are improvements that are happening right now in terms of how networks are being built, and these will be tremendous enablers and also critical components of 5G. And more likely than not, as that ecosystem is moving faster than perhaps the wireless definition or the convergence to a single wireless standard for 5G or group of standards for 5G, the software-defined networking and network function virtualization won't wait for the air interface to be solidified and tested and rolled out. So I think you'll see elements of 5G happen that are critical to 5G and critical to those kind of order of magnitude performance improvements that you'll see. These are some of the things that will be critical to 5G, enabling 5G even before 5G's quote-unquote standards or approved standards are released. Other elements of moving towards 5G, as in every other step in moving from 1G to the next, is also meeting or creating the need for additional spectrum, or defining how we get to spectrum bands that can be used worldwide. So that's another element that's outside 3G, 3GPP, but it's actually very critical towards the definition of what 5G will be, and for 5G to meet requirements. And IMT, just as it had done for 3G and then for 4G, will also define requirements, very high-level requirements that 5G systems will need to meet. Now, you had asked me about InterDigital's role within those standards group. InterDigital has been very active in 3GPP and other standards bodies, and in particular in 3GPP since the late 90s. The formation of 3GPP in 1998 and 1999, InterDigital was involved from the very beginning and has worked to develop the standards that generate an agreed upon set of wireless standards that enable the networks in this multi-billion dollar and more than billion dollars, but multi-billion number of handsets and now other devices in the ecosystem to happen and to flourish. So InterDigital sees its role as being a key contributor as a research and development company, and that is a key contributor to those standards bodies. And we believe that those standards bodies create a level playing field in an ecosystem that enable very low cost devices and provide direct benefit to customers and consumers.
Yeah, can you sort of flesh that idea out a little bit and explain to our viewers why being at the table as these standards evolve, how does it create customer value?
Okay. Well, not just for InterDigital, but for all the companies involved, and there are a significant number of companies and key drivers of those standards. And I'll give you the perspective from the end consumer, working backwards. Why I think it's tremendously important. When the companies, if you look at 1G, which was analog, and then the early stages of 2G, which was the first digital implementations, we went from several standards that were regional or distinct, some in the US, some in Europe, to worldwide standards. Now, when we moved to worldwide standards, what we did is we created an ecosystem that created such tremendous scale. And that scale provides the ability for other people in the ecosystem, application developers, equipment developers, to develop products for a much, much broader market. And what that does is it drives down the price of not only the handsets and the terminals, but of the networks themselves. The other thing that I think that's important from a end consumer perspective is the level of rapidity of development for performance and cost that's happened given these standards. Once the standards are created, all the companies are competing to a common denominator, a common standard that ensures that customers get a minimum level of performance, and that it also enables a multi-vendor ecosystem, which that competition then drives pricing down. So I'll give you, by way of example, I'll give you the comparison to, for instance, say how the PC business and the PC chipset ecosystem evolved without the level of standards that we've seen in the wireless community, worldwide standards of the wireless community. When you have more closed systems, what's happened is the end markets tend to move to monopoly or oligopoly, and the pricing tends to be relative to power performance, tends to be lower at a higher cost, or very strong performance in most cases, but the cost for that performance is higher. When you have a very diverse ecosystem of providers all providing to a minimum agreed upon standard, what happens is everybody operates at that level of performance, and the level of competition with many vendors supplying solutions drives the cost down. So if you look at the price of cellular chipsets, which are more than just connectivity modems, the graphic processors, and CPUs are included in them. When you consider how much functionality is in them and what their price for a chipset is, it's a couple of times lower than what you would see in the comparable evolution of the PC ecosystem. Now, you see the PC ecosystem now, when you move to tablets, does start to benefit from the mobile chipsets, includes connectivity as well. But I think that the consumers have seen much greater functionality, and they've seen a quicker drop in pricing, and they have benefited directly from that multi-vendor ecosystem that a single worldwide standard provides.
Okay, and yeah, and this idea of global scalability at as low a possible price point, that's key to the IoT developing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you see in IoT today is an even more fragmented ecosystem than the front end of wireless. If we look at it, the early IoT, and IoT is a pretty diverse ecosystem. It's not a single ecosystem. It's really the convergence of multiple ecosystems. You see many de facto standards, and you see many legacy standards. For instance, 2G systems and now some proprietary implementations for low power wide area and some divergent standards, you see that that divergence has actually limited the scale or the promise of IoT, how quickly it can be deployed. So if you look at it today, what's next in terms of standards? Not necessarily implementations. The implementations will continue to go forward, and I think we'll see that. But in order to actually get scale implementations like we've seen in the wireless smartphone market, I think we'll need to see some convergence on standards. And this is more than just from a wireless standpoint. And I'm not suggesting there's one standard. There'll be many. But we also need to see a convergence even in software layers and protocols. And some of that will happen. I mentioned 3GPP, but a lot of that will happen within other standards groups, other industry consortia, IETF, IEEE. Multiple different standards organizations will contribute key parts of what will become IoT. Now, just talking to the wireless connectivity portion of that, what we're seeing in parallel with the 5G, the definition of 5G wireless, we're also seeing another look at defining IoT in terms of wireless connectivity. So what we're seeing is, in parallel with the dialogue where companies are getting together with initial proposals and trying to define what 5G is, we're also seeing the convergence of companies coming together to define one standard we could talk to as what's called narrowband IoT. And that's the same thing where companies are coming together within 3GPP to define a next generation IoT wireless connectivity standard. And then what that does is that creates that same level of scalability worldwide that the wireless standards did. Now, the IoT is a little bit more diverse than smartphones. It has multiple vertical segments. It's not one industry, it's many industries. So will we see the proliferation of multiple standards? I think so, and I think you'll see multiple standards for wide area networks, and you'll see multiple standards for what I'll call local area networks in home and for personal communication and wearables. But I think that the key there is that they are standards based, whether it's Bluetooth or Zigbee or Z-Wave, through IEEE or other groups. And what that does is that creates that level of convergence and scalability and levels the playing field for companies to build solutions. And as I said, across multiple markets. And different verticals in IoT will have different standards, but I think you'll see a convergence to a narrower set than what we see today.
Okay, and as this standard setting process evolves, I think as it relates to 5G, we're tracking for something by 2019, 2020. So I was hoping you could help me understand, and the context for this is, Mobile World Congress is fresh in my memory, and it was just dominated by discussion around 5G. I even saw vendors that had products that were being labeled and marketed as 5G, and these are products that are in market or coming to market soon. Help me understand that dynamic. What's the risk? What's the benefit associated with bringing something to market pre-standardization?
Yeah, so that's something that we've seen through all of the generations of mobile technology. We've seen solutions pre the next standard being listed as that next standard. So there were marketing campaigns to call devices that I would say were 3.5G or 3.75G 4G. So there gets to be a divergence from a marketing perspective, what the end customer sees, as opposed to actually meeting that, as I mentioned earlier, that order of magnitude improvement in performance. Now, often the performance is much better and the consumers are happy with that, but it confuses them in terms of what's the promise of that next generation. And as you'll see over each evolution from 1G to the next, it takes a couple of years from the convergence to a standard to deployment of networks to having chipsets available to then having a mass market for those chipsets. And I do believe that will happen faster this time. I think each G has happened faster as the ecosystem moves much faster. The tools that are available for companies to build solutions are are really evolved. But if you look at it historically, for instance, 4G, what was LTE, the initial dialogue started in 2003, 2004 timeframe, a move towards a standard very similar to what we're doing today in terms of proposals for 5G. 2005 started work in what became Release 8, the first 4G standard from 3GPP. There were other standards that claimed to be 4G. That release happened a couple of years later. Networks started to roll out in 2010, and you saw handsets to 2011, and then mass market 2012, 2013. So about 5 to 6 years or 5 to 7 years from the start of converging as a group to when you see a market. So the time frame you mentioned is pretty much coincident with that. You see the dialogue started happening in 2015. You know, there had been dialogue pre 5G for a number of years, but the actual convergence to create a standard and to create those requirements, that started to happen in the latter half of 2015, and we've now defined standards roadmap through 2018 and beyond that will drive to 5G solutions and network deployments 2018, 2019, 2020, probably mass market a couple of years, first handsets, and then mass market a couple of years after that. So I think you'll see the similar evolution, and as I mentioned earlier, you will see some marketing around some products being called 5G that are really that evolution of 4G. And are they significant improvements in performance that end users don't necessarily care in terms of those benchmarks of what it actually makes it the IMT distinction to be 5G? So users will benefit from it, but the actual full promise of 5G will be around the time frame that you mentioned.
All right, so bring this all together for me, Jim, and tell us, on 5G over here and IoT over here, what's InterDigital's vision for each of them? And then what do you see enabling use cases between 5G and IoT? What's that? That's where you sort of see these really interesting, compelling sort of autonomous driving things, right?
Yeah, and then if you look at really 5G and the divergence of where IoT is and where some of the other pull is for 5G, it really makes things difficult. So if you look at it, the part of 5G that's going to be called enhanced mobile broadband, that's the push for higher and higher data rates and lower latency. And then when you see needing a common air interface to provide the scale for IoT, then you're over here where we're actually lowering the data rates and lowering, and we're okay with higher latency, but we're looking to get 10-year battery life. So there's been some proposals, can we support both in the same air interface there's some concepts of called slicing, network slicing. Maybe we can. Or will there be distinct air interfaces? Probably. So there's divergence in terms of the requirements, and that it's tough to create a one-size-fits-all, but there's a lot of activity in trying to do that. Now, you mentioned some of the key drivers of 5G, some use cases. So autonomous vehicles, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to I, V to I, V to X, all of those different things, they tend to be more on this side, the enhanced mobile broadband, because they're transmitting a lot of data and absolutely have to have very low latency. When you're driving a car and you have an imaging sensor telling you something, you need to be able to react quickly and have the machine learning and the intelligence and the algorithms on top of that to do something quickly, because the fundamental driver is safety. So if you look at it, you've got IoT use cases that are all the way over here and then all the way over here. So it's a very difficult challenge that the group has to create a network. And I mentioned earlier some of the enhancements to the network that will enable that basically move us away from a box kind of network to a software-based network. And then we need the evolution on the air interface to get to where we need to be able to support those really, really high data rate applications, whether they're for mobile broadband or even for new IoT applications, and still be able to support legacy type of use cases that need very low data rates, could be higher latency, but have to have 10-year battery lives. So there are proposals to try to pull that together, and there are also views that you could have one air interface that fits the high data rate IoT plus enhanced broadband, and then you can have one for low power wide area networks. So there's some divergence there, but but maybe 2 or 3 standards is better than 8, 10, 12, and that'll help drive that scale ultimately for customers and lower price devices.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate you taking some time to address those issues for us and share InterDigital's perspective. So again, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sean.